Hey guys, before we jump into the main show, I just wanted to hop on here and let you know that after we recorded this episode, we were listening to it, and then we decided that we may have said too much about our kids that maybe they wouldn't have wanted to say publicly. So, in respect to their privacy, we decided to cut out some of the stories that they specifically told us or talked to us about. So, hopefully, the whole episode still sounds great, but if you notice that a few things are jumped around, that will be why. Anyway, enjoy the episode. Hey guys, welcome to the Big Bang Theory, a podcast where we give advice on things that we are just not experts on. Either way, we're glad you're here. Hope you learned something and laugh a little bit too. Oh my gosh, you guys. It's the topic that we get so many DMs about, okay? So today we're going to talk about how and why we should talk to our kids about sex.
I'm really excited about this episode. I cannot tell you how many people I've had come and ask me this question as well, and how many of my friends and people that I grew up with who have shared stories about the negative consequences of their parents never talking to them about this.
Yeah, actually, a few days ago, I posted on our Instagram, I said, what is something you wish your parents would have told you when you were younger? And I didn't know what to expect. And we got things ranging all over the board. But one of the most popular ones was anything about sex. I wish my parents would have taught me anything about sex. And so that's why we're here today. Our episode is going to help you as a parent and then also help your future kids when they become adults and hopefully their viewpoints about sex as well. So let's jump right in.
Absolutely. So I think one of the first things to discuss is really what is it about the American culture that makes it so taboo to even have this conversation?
But you know what's crazy? And I have told TJ this so many times, like a lot of things in our culture are taboo, right? Sex is kind of one of those things where we don't talk about it, but everybody does it. But at the same time, we know that in media and marketing, sex sells. So it's ironic that the one thing nobody wants to talk about is the one thing that everybody wants to talk about.
Well, sex sells. It's in your face. You can't turn on the TV or the radio without it being in your face or in your ears. Yet, as parents, we often really struggle to have this conversation with our kids. And so I can't imagine how confusing that must be for a child to, hear this and see this on TV, but then not really understand what's being talked about. And then, if they do bring it up with their parent, to have their parent, treat it as though it's a very taboo topic.
Yeah, because I know that even some parents won't even say the word sex. They won't say it.
Like it's a bad word or
It's
something.
crazy. It's just a word. And like anything else, it's the meaning that you associate with it. So, anyways, we are here to kind of break the chain of the taboo of talking about sex, especially with your kids. And hopefully, we actually accomplish that with you today.
So I guess really the first question, as we dive into this would be, why is it important to talk to your kids about sex? We hit on that a little bit before, but I'll take the first stab at this question. I think when you think about sex, first and foremost, we're talking about the most beautiful, powerful, amazingly fun thing that you can do. It's an incredible force. It's the force of creation, right? And you think about it, it is what precipitated all of us coming into this world. And it's also one of the most, connecting, beautiful things that you can experience with your partner and your loved one.
Well, that being said, though, that's obviously TJ's attitude about sex, right? And so for him, when he talks to our kids about sex, that is the attitude that he will have. It's a beautiful force of nature. It is how we are created. So whatever attitude you have about sex or whatever way you were raised about sex, most likely will be the way that you talk about sex and how you pass that on to your kids as well. So just be aware of that as you're listening to this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Put yourself, even if you think back to your childhood and maybe you were raised, in a family that sex wasn't talked about, or, it was you would go to church and you would hear people say it as though it was like this really bad, filthy, evil thing. Well, think about the way that programmed you and the way that made you feel and think about it. And so, again, I think it's very important that when we have this conversation with our kids, we need to be confident in having this conversation first and foremost, and have it in such a way that doesn't make them feel weird or taboo. Like we've got to be able to approach it from a very, I don't want to say not a big deal way, but also almost kind of like it's not a big deal, like a normal everyday conversation, like you would talk to your kids about how their day was at school, because you need to make it be something that they feel comfortable engaging you with.
So I would say ask yourself, how comfortable are you saying the word sex out loud? Can you even say the word sex out loud in a conversation? And what do you want for your kids? Do you want to be able to talk about this stuff? Or do you want them, if you're good with where you're at, hey, you probably don't even need to listen to this episode. But I know that a lot of us, for me anyways, I was raised in a home where we did not talk about sex. I mean, the only time it was ever talked about was in the context of don't get pregnant and disgrace this family type of thing. And so there was such negative connotation with sex, which my parents did the best they could. That was probably the way that they were raised, but I knew I wanted to raise my kids very differently.
So for me, it was just the opposite, actually.
I wouldn't say the opposite. Your
Not
parents were
just the
not like
opposite.
your not parents are not like us though. Like how open we are with our kids, your parents weren't
You're
like
not
that.
letting me finish. In the way that I was brought up with between how you were raised. My dad actually, I still remember to the day the conversation that my dad had with me. We were driving up to go skiing, and I was young. I don't remember the age, maybe first grade or so. And he just asked me, he said, "Hey son, have you ever heard people talk about sex?" And I was like, "Huh? Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, do you know what that is?" And I kind of gave my answer. I can't remember what I said at the time, but what I do remember is my dad proceeding to like ask me questions. What did I think about it? What did I know about it? And then explain to me what that was. I then took it upon myself to be like the messenger of what is sex throughout my entire neighborhood. So if you ever talk to people that I was raised with, I'm the one that was probably responsible for educating all of my little buddies around that topic.
Which is not good.
Exactly. And that's kind of the point of this is it was awesome that my dad taught me, but the fact that, I say this because if you're not having this conversation with your kids are having this conversation with somebody, and it's probably one of their buddies at school. It's probably they're going to the internet from their smartphone and looking this stuff up. And
A smartphone? Nobody calls it
I
that.
don't
Oh my
know,
gosh.
a phone.
A
The
smartphone.
point is like when I was a kid, I couldn't Google that stuff. I couldn't just look it up. Nowadays, our kids, if they have a question about anything, they are a couple clicks away from finding it out.
And usually it's the wrong information. It is not going to teach them the right thing. Usually, like regarding sex or drugs or alcohol or COVID or whatever. Like you want to make sure you're the ones who teach your kids about everything if you want them to learn it the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, like they're going to hear about it. Their friends are talking about it. And you know what we've experienced with our kids at a young age. Kyson, our youngest, was exposed to pornography. I think what? He was like 5, 4. He was young. I can't remember how old he was. It was like one of his buddies showed it to him. So my point in bringing this up is that, and his buddy, he was shown it by his older brother. So it was kind of like, again, these are things we need to get in front of because these kids, they're going to learn, they're going to hear about it somewhere. So my thought is it's best that they hear it from us so that we can control the narrative than them hearing it from somebody else.
Tyson was actually in second grade, and it was one of his good little buddies that he's been friends with his whole life or had been friends with his whole life. And they were a Mormon LDS family, as were we at the time. And his older brother was the one who told him. And then that kid told Kyson. And so even families who are religious and great families, like their kids look this stuff up. So again, if you think you live in a bubble, you really don't. Like kids know so much more than you think they know.
Oh yeah, and during that time, I mean, we lived in a state that was very, very religious, and so again, your kids aren't going to be protected from this stuff, and so it's important to start having this conversation. And so you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, hun, but I want to circle back. I think it's really important, again, as a parent, to have this conversation. But if you're not comfortable with this conversation, to figure out some things that you can do to gain that confidence and that comfortability. Maybe it's by you having the conversation with your spouse and being like, hey, how do we talk to our kids about this? Or here's what I think we should say. Here's what I think we should say. Maybe you have it with one of your friends, but you need to get comfortable talking about this in a way that's not taboo. There's no shame, there's no guilt, but you can talk about it in a very matter of fact way so that you can really educate your kids and help them to understand without putting that taboo perception upon your kids either.
Okay, you guys are probably listening thinking, cool, guys, thanks for all of these whys, but now we need to know how to talk to our kids about this. We will start off by saying it is much easier to start with your kids when they are little. And I mean little, like when they're toddlers. And if you haven't yet, we'll give advice on that later on. But let's start off with toddlers.
So, first of all, with toddlers, obviously, we're not going to be talking to them about sex. But what we will start talking about is their body parts, using words, penis, vagina. Oftentimes, with as parents, we have this misperception that we need to refer to it as another word. We use pee pee or bum bum or, and I'm not saying that's bad, but you have to think about what that's teaching the child. You want to start getting your child comfortable with hearing the actual anatomical names of the body parts so that it, again, it loses that taboo and it's something that they're just like, oh, it's a normal conversation. This is my penis. That's a vagina.
The other thing I want to add is if they are touching their bodies, to not shame them about it. I know a lot of times with toddlers, even getting into young elementary, especially boys, like that's just an interesting appendage that's sticking out and they're kind of interested and intrigued by it, right? And I know a lot of times I have heard that when little boys will kind of touch their penis because, out of curiosity, the moms will be like, stop touching it or your penis is going to fall off. Stop touching it or your wee wee's going to fall off. They don't even say penis. They really use another word. So do not shame your kids about touching their own bodies. It's normal to explore. It's normal to be curious about these things that, we're living with.
Yes, I absolutely love that, Bong. And the other thing I would say is this could also be a really good opportunity for you to have a conversation around them, around the importance of this is your body. It's okay to touch your body, but it's not okay for you to touch other people's bodies.
Or for other people to touch yours. That may be another topic of like body safety and
Yeah,
abuse prevention, stuff like that.
100%. But the other thing I want to really just hit home on again is when this is happening, because it's going to happen, and you catch it, you catch them playing with themselves or touching themselves. Again, it's so important that you don't shame them for it, guilt, taboo, because again, we want to raise our kids to have to be healthy when it comes to having these conversations. And if you start off from day one, guilting them and shaming them, it's going to make it much more difficult to have that conversation down the road.
The other thing that you can start doing with your toddlers too is talking about how beautiful our bodies are. So whether you believe in God or whatever it is, you could even say like, isn't our body beautiful? God made our body so beautiful. And especially this is important for girls. As we grow up, society is so crushing to our soul sometimes with all these beauty standards. And so I love to always teach my kids how beautiful our bodies are, no matter the shape, no matter like the different scars or things that we have. And so it's a really good time to start that with your toddlers to help build their confidence in that.
I agree completely. So important. So the next one, let's say elementary school, right? Because that's really the age I think where most children are first exposed to this topic in some way or another. I know for me, I was first exposed to it early in elementary. Not only the conversation, as a boy, obviously those are conversations kids have. It's funny, we joke about it. But then I also was exposed to pornography at a young age as well, and that was back when the only way you could see it was if it was on a videotape or in a magazine. Whereas nowadays, kids have access to this at the click of a button.
So the point of us even saying this is that if you don't talk to your kids about this stuff, they're going to see it from their friends online. And it's probably going to warp their perception of sex. So I wanted to talk about a couple different books that we used when our kids were younger. And if you have kids from preschool into early elementary, this is probably going to be helpful. So the first book is called It's Not the Stork. And it's basically explaining how sex works. And it has drawings and pictures, and it's explained in a way that young kids can understand. The other book that we use is called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And this one isn't specifically about sex, it's actually about pornography versus not pornography. And it does a really good job explaining what pictures are okay and what pictures are not okay. And again, this is also for younger kids as well. And it just does a good job of explaining to kids, if you see stuff, this is what happens in your brain and how it can cause an addiction and all of that. It's actually really, really great.
This research, or this poll, I guess you would say, 33% of kids by the time they hit 16 had had sex. That jumps up to 48% by the time they turn 17. And then 71% of 18 and 19-year-olds have had sex. So as you think about that, like, you got three kids, two of your three kids will have had sex by the time they hit 18 to 19. And so with that in mind, there's a couple different ways I want to address this with teenagers. First and foremost, let's start with, what if you're one of those parents that has never had the conversation with your children? How do you then have that conversation with your teenager?
You just have to do it. You just have to put aside any reason you never had to talk about sex before, even though I know you secretly wanted to. But whatever it is, put it aside, make a commitment to do it. It's going to be quite awkward because at this age, everybody is awkward with their bodies and sex, and it's your parents. Just know it will be. But the fact that you're opening up this channel of conversation means so much to your kids. You have no idea.
Absolutely. And I would say also, how you frame the conversation is important. So, one way you could frame that is, hey, you are X number of years old. And obviously, at that age, there are a lot of people in your school, I'm sure, that are talking about sex, that are engaging in sex. And as a parent, and who loves you, I want to be able to sit down with you and have this conversation around that. First of all, what questions do you have about it? What have you heard about it? Like,
They're not going to just,
and they might not. They might not. The other thing you could do is you can frame it by saying, when I was your age, my parents never talked to me about this stuff. And so I had a lot of questions going into it. And because I was too afraid to ask my parents, I would ask my friends and other people. And it turns out I got a lot of really bad advice, a lot of stuff that wasn't true, which made it very confusing for me. And so I want to make sure that you don't have those same questions or those same concerns around it as I did. There's really no perfect way, but to Bong's point, it's very important to have it, but then to also try to remove as much taboo and awkwardness as possible and just have it as a normal conversation. If you make it to where it's a normal, natural thing, they're not going to feel as awkward. But if you go into it feeling awkward and nervous, they're going to pick up on that as well.
yeah, but I will also say you can go in the conversation saying, hey, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've been wanting to talk to you about it. It's going to be awkward. I know you don't want to talk to your mom about sex, but as your mom, this is important that we have this conversation. And I want you to be able to talk to me about this stuff. And maybe even just saying, I'm sorry I didn't talk to you about this sooner. I know you probably have a lot of questions, but let's do it now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it needs to come from both parents too. I think because you can
If there's
each,
both parents around. But
of course, if there's both parents around. But that way your child can get both perspectives around that. Now, let's say that you have been having these conversations all along with your kids, and so it's not quite as awkward. How then do you engage in that conversation with your kids? So I wanted to actually share kind of a story, not so much a story, but the way that I've been doing it with my kids. And starting off with my oldest, he and I were driving back. We went to this 4-day retreat that was really incredible. And when we were driving home, we had a 4-hour drive, and I was very aware of knowing how much time I had with him. And I started thinking in advance, here are the things I want to have, the conversations I want to have with my boy. And so because we've been talking to him about this stuff for a while now, it was, the taboo side of it, the awkwardness is all gone. We can have a very straightforward conversation. And so the way I said it to him was that, buddy, you're going to be 16 soon. You're in high school. Kids in your school are having sex. They're doing all of these things. He had already shared with us a lot of information about the fact that he knew kids were and they were talking about it. And so I said, you know what, bud, as a father who loves you, I want to be able to ensure that you have all your questions answered about that, but also I want you to understand what it is, why it's so incredible, and I want to ensure that if and when it comes time for you to engage in that behavior, you know what you're doing and you do it right. And so I started there, but then the next step I took was I said, "Hey, you got a little sister. You know how much I love her. You know how much you love her. You need to start when it comes to this stuff, you need to remember when you are with a girl that she is her daddy's princess. She has a brother or another sister that loves her, and you need to be very mindful and respectful of her, first and foremost." And so once we crossed that chasm, we really got into the actual what is sex? When's an appropriate time to engage in that? What does it really mean? I wanted to make sure because when you're young, sex is talked about in such a lustful way. But I wanted him to understand the beauty behind sex and that when you engage in it, it should be done as a form of love, not from a place of lust. And so we talked about that as well. And then I opened up time after I explained to him, and answered all these questions around those different topics I mentioned. I asked him some questions. I just said, "Hey, buddy, what are you experiencing? What are you hearing at school? What are your friends talking about? Like, what questions do you have for me that I can answer?" And it turned out to be a really awesome conversation. We probably talked for about 2 hours about it. It was very open, very honest. But the other thing, and I've mentioned this a number of times already, and I don't want this to be a debate of right or wrong, because I know religion plays a part in, and everybody has their own thoughts around whether they should wait until they're married or not to engage in it. I want to remove all that for a minute and just say with him, what was important for him for me to communicate to him is to do it in a way free of guilt, shame, and taboo. Because again, if these statistics hold as true, and 71% of kids are having sex by the time they're 19, that means they're probably not going to be married. And so you also want to talk about that and make sure they understand that if they are, in fact, to engage in that behavior at that age, that they understand everything that comes along with it, the emotional, mental, and physical things that come as part of that. But then also to do it in such a way that if they do end up doing that, they feel confident and comfortable coming to you after the fact and having that conversation. Sorry, that was a lot.
Yes, I'm still here, everybody. No, but you know what I was just thinking of? We did not talk about earlier
What's
is
that?
how we talk to our kids about sex emotionally, because
Yeah.
we teach our kids that sex is very beautiful. We teach kids that sex is done in a way to express love, and you do it with somebody that you love very much. In our family, we used to believe that you had to be married to have sex, but we no longer believe that. We believe that you need to be a certain mature age and in a loving relationship, monogamous. And anyways, and so our kids know that TJ and I have sex. Like, actually, we didn't even bring this up, but our kids know when the door's locked. Our doors are never locked. So when our doors are locked, they know what's happening. And they're like, okay. Like, honestly, it's no big deal. And to them, there's no grossness about it. Like, obviously, like, they are kind of grossed out. Like, nobody wants to think about their parents doing that, but they also know how much we love each other. And because they see us talking about it, and they just know that we have a strong and healthy marriage because that is important to us. So we're really trying to teach our kids the positive stuff about sex. But in regards to what TJ was saying, you want to create a space where if your kids do end up having sex or doing any of the other things kind of associated with that, that they are able to come to you without shame, without judgment. And that may be a little hard to navigate for those of you who may be religious, but maybe just take some time to think about how you want to do that. The other day, TJ and I and Tatum were driving to the mall. So it's just the three of us. And we were talking about a bunch of different things. Sometimes boys do only care about sex, and they will tell you things and say things and do things so that they can have sex with you. And, I just want you to know that if it ever comes the time, like, let's say you do have sex with a boyfriend or something when you weren't ready, you can always tell us and we will never judge you. In fact, there's nothing that you can do and that you would tell us that we A, probably haven't done yet, and then B, that we're gonna judge you or get mad at you. If you are honest with us and if you need help with something, we're always going to be there for you. And I just love that she was able to even just tell us all those things because we're just keeping these channels open for communication in the future.
Yeah, and it was like so normal. It was like a conversation you'd have with your kid about like whatever topic that you're comfortable having, like talking to your kid about how school's going or whatnot. And I was really appreciative in that moment that we could have that conversation. I think a couple other things that I think are important, especially from a father's perspective, if you're engaging in this conversation with your son as well. A couple of the other items I really hit on with my boy, and I will preface this up front. You can agree or disagree with me, but I want my boys to be incredible lovers. I want them to know how to love a woman, how to make love to a woman, and how to make it be a very good experience. And so, in this conversation that I had with Kyson, I brought this up and I said, "Look, buddy, the problem with kids your age is most of them don't know what they're doing. They're usually manipulating a girl in some way, shape, or form to have sex. And what happens is it's a give take relationship. And the boy is taking from the
You
girl.
mean a take a relationship.
Take. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, take. Or basically, they're manipulating a girl and they're getting something out of it. You know, the boy's getting something out of it, but the girl's not. And not only is she not getting something out of it, she's having virtue taken from her. And it's something that can have a very profound emotional effect on her. And so I said to him, I said, buddy, when it comes time for you to do this, you really need to ensure that you really care about this person, that you love her, that you've received her consent from her, that it's okay for you to do this, and that you make it a good experience for her. And again, this is an area where I know this might be wading in deep waters, and there will be people that will disagree with me, and I'm okay with that because I want my boy to do it from a place of love and respect. And again, make it a good, pleasurable experience for her as well, because I think that is very important. Sex can be a very healing, nurturing, like mutually beneficial thing when engaged in the right way. And I want to make sure that my boy has all the tools that he needs to be able to do that in an effective way. But then also understanding the last part of this is the emotional toll that can take on you. And I explained that to him. I said, you have to understand sex creates deep emotional bonds. And so if you're going around doing that with people you don't love or care about, that has a negative impact on both you and that person. You need to think about that prior to engaging in that.
The other thing that I've done with all three of my kids, starting when they were young, is talking about consent. And what that means for our family, well, what it should mean for everyone is I told Kyson, I was like, if you're dating a girl and you get to the point where you guys are going to have sex or do other things, that you have to make sure she says yes. And she says yes of her own free will. And you can tell it's not forced or anything like that, then it's okay. But if she says yes and 10 minutes later and you guys start doing it or whatever, and she says no, as soon as she says no or is hesitant, it's done. You turn it off, you're done. That no means no. And I told Tatum the same thing. I said, you may say yes to a boy at first, and a few minutes later or half an hour later, you start feeling hesitant and you decide you don't want to anymore. You have the right to say no, even if you said yes in the first place. So I wanted to make sure that my kids knew how important consent is, and that if they don't consent, it's not going to be the beautiful experience that it's supposed to be. The other thing too is I've also talked to Tatum and told her about how when I was, in college, I felt like I was used by some boys and they just used me to have sex with me. And I was very open with her. This is actually in the same car ride where TJ was as well. And I said, so I just never want you to feel that way. But if you ever do feel that way, I'm here for you. I've experienced that. And I just love that I'm able to have these conversations with her so that she knows that I've been through it and I'm just trying to prevent this from happening.
Yeah, there's two things I want to really hint on that you mentioned there that I love, hon. First of all, you'll notice that with our kids, this is a conversation they're having with both mom and dad, right? We're both having these conversations with our kids, and it's important. it's when Kyson said that to us that day, my heart just swelled. I was so proud of him because I was like, he's listening, he's understanding it. And it was so rad that he can talk to dad about it and get dad's perspective about sex and all of that. And I can educate him on that. And then he can also have the conversation with mom. And same thing with our little girl. The other thing that I think is very important is you'll notice we talk about ourselves. We use our own past experiences to draw upon, and we talk about this with our kids. And I think this is another stumbling block. And again, this is just my opinion, but I think this is another stumbling block that a lot of parents have is they're afraid to talk about their past and the things that they did because they think, oh, well, if I told my kid that I had sex before I was married or that I smoked a cigarette or whatever, then I'm just giving him permission to do it himself. And while I can maybe kind of agree with that, I think you're missing a big opportunity because our kids need to know that we're humans too, and that we were once their age too, and that we had the same struggles, the same questions that they have. And so when we do that, there's this power in being vulnerable with our kids and being honest and truly authentic with them. And I feel like because we've done that with our kids, that's also made these conversations so much easier.
I think the other thing that makes it easier is we do a pretty good job of listening without judging with our
Yeah.
kids. And so it's not just about sex, it's with a lot of different things that when they come and they have the courage to tell us something that we're probably not going to be happy about, we listen and we say, okay, let them ask them more questions to get them talking. But how do you think our kids are going to feel if they come to us with something and we don't judge them? That heaven forbid something big happens in the future, that they can come talk to us because they know we're just going to give them advice without judging them, chastising them, or making them feel like a terrible person. So you have to make sure that you create an environment for your kids where they're able to come talk to you about these things without feeling like they're going to get spanked and get grounded.
Oh man, I have so many people and just acquaintances I've made throughout my life that, they never felt like they could go talk to their parents about this stuff. And they suffered in silence, not being able to fit, like being afraid to go talk to their parents because they would judge them. I think the last thing I really want to mention as it relates to this podcast, I touched on a little bit earlier, but I think as a parent, our role is to really give our kids the tools that they need to be successful, to be happy, to have a great life, right? And sex is such an important part of life. It's such an important part of marriage and having a good healthy sex life. I do not know a single married couple that has a great sex life that is unhappy. I just don't. And I'm not saying it's the most important thing, but I am saying it is a very important thing.
I know people who do.
I don't. But
That's
that's
because you don't talk to the wives.
maybe. But I don't know any husbands who do. So, my point being, I'm not saying it is the most important thing. I am saying it is a very important thing. And with that being said, as a parent, we need to think how can we bring our kids and raise our kids up to where they can have a great sex life as well. So that they're informed, they feel comfortable talking about it like and so I would make the invitation to really sit down and think about it. And this may sound strange, but think about it. And not even just applying this to sex, but thinking about all the different aspects of life. What do I want this aspect of my child's life to look like? Their career, their spouse, their love life, etc. And then what are the things that I can do now? What are the conversations I can start to have with them now to help arm them and give them the tools they need so that they can be as successful as possible in those areas?
I also want to add this probably should have been said earlier, but I know people in my life who have had a lot of purity culture shame when it comes to sex because people are raised different ways. And because of the way they were raised, never talked about sex. You had to be a virgin when you got married, or you're sinful, those things. When they finally got married, sex was a very difficult topic. They were not able to have sex because they were never talked about it except for in a very negative way. And I just want you guys to help your daughters not feel that way. And if you are somebody who was raised that way, you probably don't like that at all. So now is the time to fix it.
Well, and this could also be a topic for another day, but I think adding to that, so many women that we know that never had an orgasm, right, in their marriage. And again, this is one of those things that's like, that's important. That's very important, and And so being able to have this conversation and educate them so it's a good experience for them as well. And yeah, I really love what you just said. So it's time now for the challenge of the week. And so this week, the challenge would be, first of all, if this is something that's not comfortable for you at all, to find some time where you can sit down and really start to get comfortable with this conversation. Write it out, think it out, talk it out, but come to a point to where you can first be comfortable having the conversation. And then the next step would to be to not necessarily schedule the time, but to make a time in your own mind to sit down and have this conversation with your children. We know that it's not going to be easy for you, especially if you've never done it before, but it's that first step. And I can promise you that if you do this, it's going to make the conversation become much easier each time thereafter.
Well, guys, that's it for today's episode. I hope that you learned something that you can go and use. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. That would be so amazing of you, and it would come back in good karma points. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.